Chapter 5. This is the beginning of Unit 2, and in this chapter we're going to be covering the bones of the pectoral girdle and the brachial region. Our first bone we're going to cover is the scapula, so this is commonly referred to as your shoulder blade. Our first one is called the body. This is just the main component of the bone itself. Our next structure we see on here, the spine. This is a structure you want to highlight in your notes. This is going to be a really important landmark to help you figure out right from left. And specifically, the spine is located only on the posterior side of the bone. So if you can see the spine, which I promise you will be able to see it because it's a super easy landmark to find, you are looking at the posterior side of the bone. If you actually feel on the back of your shoulder, you'll feel this ridge on your shoulder blade that actually goes all the way out to the lateral side of your shoulder, and that is the spine of your own scapula you're feeling there. So again, that's going to tell you the posterior side. The big bump at the end of the spine is called the acromion. So the bump that's physically connected to the spine will be the acromion, whereas the one that's just in front of this one or anterior to it's called the coracoid process. We also have three fossae that we're going to see on the scapula. Our first one's called the supraspinous fossa. If you'll recall, fossa means shallow depression. Supraspinous, if we break that word down, it's just telling you it is above the spine. So this is a shallow depression located above the spine. So this will be found posterior. Infraspinous fossa will just be the shallow depression below the spine. And also it'll be located on the posterior side. And then we have the subscapular fossa. This is found on the anterior side opposite to these previous two fossae. So if you can see the spine, you know you're looking at posterior, you can expect to have those two fossa above and below it. Whereas if you don't see the spine, the fossa you're going to be looking for is the subscapular fossa, which was on the anterior side. We also have the glenoid fossa, or you'll see it called the glenoid cavity. This is on the lateral side of the bone. This is going to be the surface that the humerus, which is your upper arm bone, is going to articulate, and it's going to form that ball and socket joint. So this is another structure that you want to star in your notes, as this tells you the lateral side of the bone. A few more features we got to cover here. We're going to have three borders on the scapula. Our first one is the lateral border, or also called the axillary border. This is going to go from that glenoid cavity down to something called the inferior angle, which we'll get to in a moment. But the lateral side of the bone is right around the armpit region, and hence its name also being referred to as the axillary border. On the medial border, which is going to be the edge of the bone from the inferior angle to the superior angle, this is going to also be called the vertebral border, as it's closer to your vertebral column. And then the border on top is just called the superior border. We're also going to have three angles on the scapula. Our first one is the superior angle, which will be on top. Inferior angle will be on the bottom. And then the lateral angle is going to be the parts of the bone on the lateral side that is surrounding that glenoid cavity. We'll also have two tubercles. The supraglenoid tubercle is going to be a small rounded bump that sits above the glenoid cavity. And this is going to be the area or the structure that the long head of the biceps brachii is actually going to originate on. So we'll cover that again when we get to muscles. Infraglenoid tubercle will be below the glenoid cavity, and this is where the long head of the triceps brachii is going to originate. We're also going to see this big indention in the bone itself, which is called the suprascapular notch, as it's located on the superior side of the bone. So as we take a look, first thing we want to do here is find the spine. So this big structure right here, this tells you this is the posterior side. So let's go ahead and label this as posterior. Now, if you follow the spine right here, all the way to the end, you'll see the big bump, which is the acromion. And then we don't really see a whole lot of it. We'll see it here better in just a moment from a different view. But in front of it is where we find the coracoid process.